Dave Talks Comics, Episode 122, Baltimore Comic-Con, Part 1. Welcome to Dave Talks Comics, the program where I talk about comic books, cartoons, and comic book conventions. Most episodes are a mix of summary and opinion and include spoilers. Please keep that in mind. Spoilers. All past episodes can be streamed or downloaded from the program's website, davetalkscomics.com. In addition to the program's website, this podcast can also be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and Facebook. On this episode, I will be talking about my first day at the 2016 Baltimore Comic-Con, including what I bought, panels I went to, and what I had to eat. My original plan was to go to Baltimore Comic-Con and spend all 3 days of the con at the con. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. And at this point, it's Day 2 of the convention. Convention is closed and I'm back home. What happened is that I started a new job recently and I thought I could take Friday off, and I never really asked for Friday off. I was just kind of hoping to, say something at the last minute like, oh yeah, I'm not going to be here tomorrow, or I'm not going to be here on Friday. And it became apparent there was some stuff that had to get done, and so, I didn't get to go. It's a little too far. I don't live in Baltimore. I live in the Washington, D.C. area, very close into Washington, D.C. in Maryland. And the time involved, I would have basically, if I went into work for half a day, I wouldn't have been able to get there before, say, 4 o'clock. And I ended up spending a full day at the office. So I didn't get to go. I was kind of down about it. I didn't, as the day went on, I got into a better mood, but it kind of felt like having to work on Christmas Eve is what it felt like, which I have done before, but it's been a while since I've done that. Continuing the theme of Christmas Eve and Christmas, I had trouble sleeping last night. It felt, I don't know, it was kind of like it was going to be Christmas today. And, kind of like when I was a little kid, you'd have trouble sleeping on Christmas Eve, and you'd wake up in the middle of the night, and that happened a couple times. But I managed to sleep through the night. Well, I didn't sleep all the way through the night because I did wake up a couple times. But it kind of gave me that feeling of anticipation that something was coming, and I was really looking forward to this. So I got up early. I had breakfast. I showered. I took care of one errand outside of the house I needed to take care of. I really didn't have a whole lot of time because I wanted to be there in time for the start of the show at 10 o'clock. So I left around 8:30. It's normally, I can get there if there's no traffic, I could probably be parked in Baltimore in under an hour, probably about 45 minutes, something like that. And maybe at the convention in about an hour, maybe just barely under an hour, depending on how close to the convention I parked. Well, I had no trouble leaving the D.C. area. I had no trouble getting onto 95. But when I got up to Baltimore, things changed drastically. And that's because there was some sort of a run, a 5K or something in the downtown area. And so they had all these streets closed off, and the traffic was it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. And it ended up taking me, I got up to Baltimore in probably about a half hour. And once I got up there, and I had reserved parking. I had a parking place reserved for, not a specific space, but I had a reservation in a garage to park, which was like a half mile from the convention center. Once I got up there and I got into this traffic, it took me over an hour to get to that parking garage, which under good circumstances should have taken less than 10 minutes. I figure somewhere around an hour and 10 minutes, an hour and 15 minutes it took me. And I probably spent a good half hour to 40 minutes of that, at least, just in this one situation where I turned And I tried going down this one street which Google Maps had told me to go this way, and it was just ridiculous, the traffic. And eventually they ended up turning us around. I had to come back out that street, turn and go north, and then eventually I was able to turn and head east. And I was at a point where I was ready to give up. I was wondering if I should just give up and go home. That's what I was feeling like. Now, I am so glad that I had my tablet loaded with podcasts, and I listened to a good deal of not this past week, but the week before's episode, because I'm kind of behind in my podcast listening. But the prior week's episode of Kermode and Mayo's film review podcast, which is a BBC podcast, a film review show, which usually runs about 2 hours. I started that program. I believe this week's program was 2 hours and 10 minutes, 2 hours and 5 minutes, or last week's, the one I was listening to. I started it when I was probably 5 to 10 minutes before I got off of 95. When I parked the car, I was an hour and 20 minutes into that podcast. So it really took a long time. Well, parking the car was no problem once I got to the garage. I got my stuff together. I walked to the convention center. Just as I was getting to the convention center, I took off my pack off my back to get out my ticket, and I noticed I had the back of the bag open the whole time, and I'm amazed that nothing spilled out, like my water bottle or nothing else. Now, if it'd been my water bottle, it probably would have made some noise, but still, I was stunned that nothing had fallen out, and I checked, and I'm pretty sure I didn't lose anything that way, but nobody had said anything to me. I walked, like I said, about a half mile. I'd certainly seen plenty of people. I don't know. So I got my wristband. I went into the convention center. It was, at that point, it was about 11:15. So the show had opened at 10. It had been open for about 45 minutes. I walked around. The first panel that I wanted to go to was at noon. No, I think at 12:15. Yeah. So I figured I would head up to it at noon. So I had about an hour and 15 minutes. I walked around and I walked around and I walked around. I think I only talked to one person in this time at any length, and that was the artist who works on a book called Postal, I believe, from, I think it's Top Cow. I think his name is Isaac. I think that's what he said his name was. Isaac. Let's see, did I write that down in my notes? Yes, Isaac. That's what I wrote down in my notes. And we talked for about 5 minutes or so about the comic book. And then eventually I moved on. After that, I didn't buy anything in this period. I just walked around. I looked at things. I didn't really talk to anybody else. I didn't arrange for any commissions. I wasn't really interested in that. Although I did bring a big plastic sleeve to take home with me. Any art I might buy, whether that's a print or original art. But I didn't buy anything today, so I brought the sleeve home empty. Yes. So at noon I went upstairs and I went to what was probably my favorite panel of the day, which was the writing panel. And the full name of that panel was here it is. Where is it? Nope, that's not it. That's the Saturday programming. I believe it was The Process of Writing. One of the big questions asked of writers is how you do it. That's difficult to answer because there's so many ways to write. Join writers J.M. DeMatteis, Paul Storrie, Amy Chu, Mark Waid, Hope Larsen as they discuss how they write, moderated by Robert Greenberger. And I've been to a number of panels that Robert Greenberger has done, I think mostly at Baltimore Comic-Con, possibly also at Heroes. I'm not sure. But he does a great job. I've always enjoyed the panels that he moderates. And he did an excellent job with this one. They went over a lot of stuff. For instance, so he started with, and I'm not going to go in great detail on this because I did record this panel, and so I will be posting this at some point in the future, although it may not be for a little while because I'm still in the process of posting panels from Heroes Con, and then I also have a couple panels from Pulp Fest that I might post. So some of the questions that Robert Greenberger asked, and he did a great job of running this panel and asking the panel and guiding the panelists through a number of questions. The first one was, what does it mean to be a writer, and what's the biggest misconception about writing? And they got into some talking about what people think, about how people react when they say they're comic book writers, and what they think that means, or how little they think that means. That they're just the person who writes the words and the balloons, basically the letterer, or that they're handed the story basically fully done, fully drawn. So that was the first question. The second question was about subplots, and they talked a little bit about how there used to be a lot more subplots in comic books, and I definitely have seen that myself in reading. If you read like old X-Men stories written by Chris Claremont back from the early 80s, which I've read quite a bit of that because that's when I started reading the X-Men. I mean, starting with like X-Men 94 and going forward, especially as you get into, even from around X-Men 100, around there, you start to see all these stories layered in together. The same thing is true of Paul Levitz's work on Legion of Superheroes, which I have been talking about on the episodes that I've been doing on the Great Darkness Saga. So there was a little bit of talk about that, about how that's done and how Levitz would run A, B, and C plots. Let's see, what other questions? There was a question about writing for digital, because I believe, who is it that writes for digital? Well, Mark Waid writes for digital because he does some digital comics through his website Thrillbent. So there were some questions about that. They talked about that a little bit, and also they got into writing. How do you write for plot or for characters? And they talked a little bit about motivation and characters and plot and genres and themes, and it was really good. It really got me thinking, and I took a lot of notes during this panel. And I'm not giving you half of the stuff that I took notes on. I might scan the pages, but my notes are very sketchy. They're not like full-blown notes, and my handwriting isn't always legible. Another question that Bob Greenberger asked was about putting your life in story. Do you do it consciously or maybe not consciously? Have you done it? And there was a little bit of talk about that. And I mean, I think Mark Waid, for instance, talked about how he wanted to be a Flash writer and how Wally West wanted to be the Flash, and how it was appropriate that he was writing Wally West since there was that confluence of interests. And J.M. DeMatteis said something about how, it's impossible your life is always going to bleed out onto the page. And I think he even made the example of even the parking attendant is some piece of your subconscious in some way. That parking attendant in that comic book, not just the big characters. But let's see, other questions that came up. Has research caused you to change your story? And that was that. I didn't take any notes on what they had to say there, but from what I recall, the answer was definitely yes, although sometimes in different ways, not always because it was correcting the person who was the writer, but sometimes because they discovered new things that they had no idea about, and so they would want to insert those things into the story. Then they got into a discussion of, do writers need editors? And I think the big answer here was yes and no, and that it depends on the editor, and that there are editors that are very good for writers or that work well with a particular writer, and there's editors that don't, and sometimes editors, and that the role of editors has changed over the years, and that sometimes editors are basically mouthpieces for it. It's almost like they're trying to write the story, or not write the story, but they're trying to present the story to the writer, and then they expect the writer to write what they have given them. And as opposed to letting the writer come up with the story. And so there was some discussion there of good editors and bad editors. And one of the things that came out is the great editors can help you to take chances and because they're there in case sometimes you'll do it really good. And I think this was something that Hope Larsen said. This is something that's a really good editor, if you take a chance, sometimes it'll turn out really well, and sometimes it won't. And the editor, if they work well with you, can point that out to you without completely destroying what you're trying to do. At that point, they got some questions. They asked for questions from the audience, and for about the last 10 minutes, they took questions from the audience. Probably the most interesting questions from the audience were, well, the first one that I really liked was, have you ever collaborated in writing? And they asked the writers to talk a little bit about that. And of course, certainly Mark Waid collaborated in writing the, 52, that series from DC Comics from about 10 years ago. And J.M. DeMatteis had collaborated with Keith Giffen in writing the Justice League, when the Justice League was rebooted after Crisis on Infinite Earths. And so they had both of them had some interesting comments on collaborating in writing comics, and how that sometimes, let's see, what was it that Mark Waid said? Here, let's see, what is it he said? Mark Waid said, it can be great in the room, but awful on the page. And so that's what I wrote in my notes. And I think what he was saying was that, you can have these great, hour-long sessions, or even sessions that last days, talking about what you're going to write, but then you go to write and something completely different comes out when you write it. And J.M. DeMatteis talked a little bit about working with Keith Giffen and how he would write something and Keith Giffen would take it from him and he would just rewrite it basically, and then it would get bounced back to DeMatteis and he would rewrite it, and it was a little muddled. I mean, you'll have to listen to the panel to get the full extent of what it was that they did, or what it was that he said and Mark Waid said about collaboration. And the other interesting question I thought from the audience was, somebody asked, how and where does plotting come into the process of writing a story? And you got very different answers. For instance, from Mark Waid, who sees plots as a way of moving characters from emotion to emotion, but he doesn't really think about it. He doesn't use it as a way to frame his story, or as a way to, I think he doesn't schedule as much when he's doing that, as opposed to Amy Chu and Hope Larsen, who are both fairly new to writing comic books. And both of them, or at least for the big two they are, and both of them feel a little more constrained, a little more as if, I guess, they have to build their reputations before they can really start taking chances. And so they both said that they definitely plot things out. And they can't just work off of just the seat of their pants. They just can't just start writing without having some sort of a framework in place. So that was the writers' panel, and I thought it was great. It was a lot of fun. After that, by then it was about 1:15. I was getting kind of hungry, so I left the convention center and I made my annual pilgrimage up to Mekong Delta, which is a Vietnamese restaurant, which is up on Charles Street, about a half mile from the convention center. I had the usual up there. I had their shrimp and pork noodle soup, which I think is excellent. And I also had some summer rolls, and I was very full from that. I haven't eaten dinner yet. It's about 8 o'clock, and it's getting closer to 9 o'clock now. It's about 8:30, 8:40. I still haven't eaten dinner yet. I'm still not that hungry. But it's excellent food. If you're ever in Baltimore, you should check that place out. And I got back to the convention around 2:30, 2:45. The next panel I wanted to go to was at 4 o'clock. So I wandered around a while. I wandered through Artist Alley. I wandered through, and I had walked most of the showroom floor earlier in the day. But I wandered through Artist Alley again. I didn't really see anything that I really wanted. It was much more crowded at that point than it had been when I had walked through before noon. I ended up at a booth, and I don't recall exactly who they were, but they had a lot of boxes with $1 comics. Now I started by going through their independent comics, which were in a complete disarray. In other words, no organization whatsoever. I found, I think, two things in there. Now, this is where I'm going to talk about a lot of stuff that I bought. The first thing that I found in there was something which is completely unexpected, something that was not on my list, but something that I'd heard about before, and this was an issue of Fashion in Action, which is an Eclipse comic book, which I believe is going to be reprinted or has been reprinted just recently in a collection. And I believe I heard of that from Hope Larsen, Hope Nicholson, who also did that book on those Canadian comic book. Oh, geez. What's the name of that? I have that right around here somewhere, and I can't think of what it is. But I believe she put together, I believe they've done or they're in the process of doing a reprint of this Fashion in Action. So it's Eclipse, and I've kind of gotten this interest in Eclipse lately. So I picked this up, and these comics were all $1. I also found, even though this was the independent section, I found an issue of the DC Direct Currents book. It's not really a book. It's more like a flyer from, let's see, when is this from? This is from 1980. Let's see if I can find a date on this. September 1988. And I have a bunch of these from like a couple years after this. This is issue 9. So book shipping October 4th through October 25th, 1988. And I just love these things, these advertisements. So I had to pick this up, even though they charged me $1, even though this is a free handout back in the day when it first came out. Although when I get finished talking about these comic books, I definitely paid less than $1 for that. So I kept going through these boxes. So I went through a bunch of boxes of independent stuff. Then I started going through their DC comics. And I stayed focused on the DC comics basically because DC, I have the Marvel Unlimited subscription. So I don't have, whereas DC doesn't have that sort of thing. So it's a lot easier to read Marvel comic books via the Marvel Unlimited subscription, although they don't have everything. So I prefer to focus on DC when I'm looking for back issues. So let's see, what did I get? Well, I'm not going to take these in order. I'm going to group these by things that I found. One run that I'm kind of gotten interested in reading is the run of The Flash from about issue 145 to 160. And this is the 1987 Flash series. This is the series that was originally written by Mark Waid, but at this point, I believe it was being written by, well, all of these issues that I have here were written, well, no, some of them were written by Waid. Yes, Waid and Brian Augustin, and some of them have, what really caught my interest was the art by, well, part of what caught my interest was the fact that they were drawn by Paul Pelletier, who later drew the Negation, which was a comic book from CrossGen. And back about 10, 15 years ago, I actually bought a piece of art that, an original page from an issue of Flash. I can't remember exactly which one it is, but it's a page that was done by Paul Pelletier. So I've kind of gotten in my head that I want to try reading some of this stuff. So I picked up issues 156, 57, 58, and 160. I picked up 161 either at Heroes Con earlier this year, it might have been there, or maybe at Baltimore last year. So I'm missing 159, and I'm also missing the first couple parts, I think, of this story. What is it called? I'm not sure what it's called. Let me see. Let me open up one of these issues. See if this... I don't think these have been reprinted at all. Yeah, I don't see a name here for this storyline, but they all kind of had this interesting Flash logo on them that only was on the title for a short time. Let's see, the next thing that I picked up was some issues of Green Lantern. Well, actually only one of them is an issue of Green Lantern proper, and that's issue 142, which I believe is the second appearance of the Omega Men. They first appeared in issue 141, which I believe goes for quite a bit of money these days. And I've gotten kind of an interest in the Omega Men. I love that Omega Men story that where the Omega Men appeared in New Teen Titans issues, was it 23, 4, 5, and Annual 1, which I read a number of years ago and I've talked about a little bit about once or twice before. So I've been kind of interested in getting the early appearances of the Omega Men, although I've got to say that prior to their appearance in that story, that Teen Titans story, I haven't been terribly impressed. There's not that many appearances of them, but there was a couple of appearances in Action Comics that I bought and read a few years back, and I wasn't terribly impressed with those stories. And I think those were written by Marv Wolfman as well, so I don't know what the story is there. Maybe George Perez has more impact on the story than... I don't know. The other Green Lantern-related thing that I bought is Tales of the Green Lantern Corps. Now, this is the miniseries from 1981. And part of my reason for buying this is that when I was doing some research into on the Legion of Superheroes issue 295, I believe it was an issue which involved the origin of the universe. And that's going to be coming up on I have recorded something that's going to be coming up on a future episode of this podcast. But one of the things that I was doing some research on Krona, who was the bad guy, and it was the one who the one who was kind of responsible for the creation of the Anti-Monitor. And so when I did some research into Krona, I found that he had first appeared in Green Lantern number 40, which was also the first Green Lantern issue to feature a crossover between the Green Lanterns of Earth 1 and Earth 2. And I've actually read that since then, and I'm planning to record an episode. I might do that, and I might do these 3 issues. And the reason why is because these are the only 4 issues. These are the only 4 appearances of Krona prior to Crisis on Infinite Earth. So I have read the issue of Green Lantern number 40, and this is Tales of the Green Lantern Corps numbers 1 through 3. It is a mini-series. And I'm not sure how great a story it's going to be, but I'm kind of interested in reading it just for historical purposes. If it turns out to be a great story, that's great. It's written by Len Wein and Mike W. Barr. Well, it says scripter Len Wein from a plot by Mike W. Barr. And the art is by Joe Staton and Frank McLaughlin, at least in the first issue it is. And John Costanza's the letterer. Very interesting. Very interesting. So I had to pick those up. When I saw those, I was like, I got to grab them. And I grabbed way more than I bought way more than I intended to, although I got a discount, and I don't think that was entirely intentional. And I'll get to that. I picked up the second issue of the 1991 Justice Society limited series. This was the 8-issue limited series of the Justice Society. This is the one with Black Canary on the cover. I do want to read this whole series. I have the first issue, and now I have the second issue, but they didn't have any of the other issues from this 8-issue series. They did have a few issues from the 10-issue series from the following year, but I wanted to read this one first, and I had to restrain myself in some way from buying too much, so I decided not to buy those issues, and it wasn't like they had a complete set of the 1992 series, which ran for 10 issues. Oh, another thing that I picked up out of the Independence box was an issue of Vietnam Journal. And I had not heard of this until just recently when I was reading back issue number 37, which was the all-war issue or something like that, which I bought digitally a little while back, a few years ago. And I pulled that out because I was looking for something to read. And I had that, and I knew I hadn't read most of it. And so I started to read through those. Now, there's an article in there. One of the articles in there is on this comic book, Vietnam Journal, by Don Lomax. It's from Apple Comics. I have never read a single issue of this. This was the only issue that I could find there. So I picked this up. It's a black and white comic book, no color. And this, of course, this is from 1980, let's see. What's the date? May of 1988. And I'm not sure how frequently this came out. Maybe bi-monthly. I'm not sure because subscription 6 issues makes me think it's probably bi-monthly. prior to finding a number of those things that I've already talked about, I found a bunch of issues of the Teen Titans, New Teen Titans, and Tales of the Teen Titans that I wanted to fill out my collection. I don't think I'll ever complete the collection because, of course, the second issue of New Teen Titans is the first appearance of Deathstroke the Terminator, and my understanding is that goes for hundreds of dollars these days, if not thousands, depending on the condition it's in. So I probably won't ever own that, but I'll probably end up buying a collection of those early issues of New Teen Titans. What I did pick up today was, I picked up another copy of the annual #1 of New Teen Titans, which I have, and I believe the copy that I have is the same copy that I bought back in 1982 when this issue came out from a drugstore, and I think it's kind of beat up, and this issue that I bought here is in pretty good shape. It's not in perfect shape, but it's in pretty good shape, and so I thought it might be good to get I'm not going to get rid of the original. I love that comic book too much, but I probably have read that quite a bit, although I was 12 years old when this came out, so it wasn't like I was completely manhandling it. I think I was a little conscious of taking care of comic books at that point in my life. But I decided, why not just get another copy of this comic book? This is the last part of that, the final part of the New Teen Titans, Omega Men team-up story. I have the other 3 parts. I bought those much more recently. I think I've talked about that before, how I had the annual, and I enjoyed the annual very much for years, and it wasn't until just a few years ago that I went back and actually found the first 3 parts of that story and read it. Then I bought the other issues. Okay, so I got at least 3 more issues of New Teen Titans. I picked up issues 29, 30, and 31. I think that 29 and 30 I used to have, but I have no idea what happened to them. And this is an issue which has the New Teen Titans teaming up, or not teaming up, but battling the Brotherhood of Evil. Plasmus and Warp and Hoonigan, I think, and Phobia. And I'm pretty sure that I had issues 29 and 30, but I don't know what happened to them. And 31 I don't think I ever had, and I believe this is the conclusion to this. I believe it's a 3-part story. And I have 28 already, so if it's not a 3-part story, then I don't have anything to worry about there. Okay, then I picked up 4 issues that I wanted. 3 issues because they are part of the collected edition of the Judas contract, and one of these I used to have. 2 of them I did not have before, and I don't think I'd read them before. And those are issues 38 and 39 of New Teen Titans. 38 is Who is Donna Troy? 39 shows Kid Flash and Dick Grayson walking away, having dropped their costumes. They're wearing clothes. They're not naked, but they're walking away from the reader, and their costumes are scattered behind them. But those 2 issues are included in the Judas Contract collection. I read the Judas Contract earlier this year, and I made notes on it. And so by reading these and having already notes on that stuff, and then rereading, and then I also picked up Tales of the Teen Titans number 41, which I think is the first issue. I think that's the first issue that bore the name Tales of the Teen Titans, which continued the numbering from New Teen Titans. And this was I think this was the second story, the second Brother Blood story. The first one was in issues 21 and 22, I think. I think that's what it was, 21, 22. Yes, I believe so. So this is the second part of this Brother Blood story, which started in issue 40, which I already have. And then issue 45, which, like 41, I can remember buying these. I'm positive I bought 45 at that same drugstore where I bought the annual number 1. But this is one which has Aqualad and Aquagirl on the cover. And so that's the extent of my, no, not quite. It's almost the extent, I'm sorry, yes, that is the extent of my buying of comics related to the Teen Titans. Now, I've narrowed it down, and I've got to make a list because I'm very close to having a run from like issue 12 through issue 50 if you run New Teen Titans and Tales of the Teen Titans together. I'm only missing maybe 8 or 9 issues in there. So I've got to make a list of the ones that I'm missing, and maybe I'll go back and see if I can pick up some of those or maybe all of those tomorrow. Now what I found next are some almost reference comics, and this is kind of going to round out the stuff that I bought. I found the Secrets of the Legion of Superheroes, which is something I've been meaning to pick up, and I couldn't resist this. This is another one of these early miniseries from DC Comics. These were all 50 cents each, and let's see, this came out in 1981, just like the Tales of the Green Lantern Corps miniseries that I also bought. And I believe I talked about this series a little bit, or about some things that happened in this series, because I think that it was in this series that it was revealed that R.J. Brand was Chameleon Boy's father, because he doesn't look anything like Chameleon Boy, and I talked about that on one of the early episodes when I was talking about the Great Darkness Saga, the Legion of Superheroes, the Great Darkness Saga. In addition to picking up those 3 issues, I also found a complete set of the official Legion of Superheroes Index, all 5 issues. Had to pick that up. This is from ICG. I love these. These are great reference books, especially since I've been reading some of the Legion of Superhero stories, and I want to continue reading them. These are great reference. They have like synopses. They tell you who appeared in the issues. They have images of the covers. They have all the full credits. It's just, and this is, you'd have to, as good as the internet is, I don't think you can find all this information in one place on the internet. And so that's why these are really good for somebody like me who wants to do a podcast and wants to talk about things like the Legion of Superheroes. And so that brings me to the final things that I bought, all from the same retailer. And that was 5 of the 8 issues of the Justice League of America official index, also from ICG. The same sort of thing. Now, all they had was issues 2 through 6. There are 8 issues in this, so I'm missing 1, 7, and 8. But it's like the Legion of Superheroes Index. It's the same deal. You've got they have the covers in here. They have synopsis, and it's not just like a 2-sentence synopsis. It's like half a page synopsis. They have all the credits. They list all the characters that appear in these stories. It's wonderful. I love this. I mean, this is great. So that's basically everything that I bought. Now, these comic books were supposed to be $1 a piece. But when I went to pay for them, the guy counted them out. He counted 33. I'm not sure exactly how many that is there. I had counted 31. Either way, I gave him a 50. And then he gave me... I gave him 53 because he said 33. I gave him 53, and then he gave me $30 in change. And I thought about saying something, and I decided not to, and maybe that wasn't 100% honest on my part, but that's what I did. And I don't know if he ever realized his mistake, but I assume he made a mistake, because I didn't see any signs like, about getting, buy 10, get 10 free or anything like that. So that's all the comic books that I bought today. And that was it in one fell swoop. After that, I went upstairs to go to a couple more panels, both of which I taped or recorded. The first one was the editor's panel. This wasn't quite what I thought it would be, or quite what it was advertised that it would be. It was, the editors... It was supposed to be changing roles of editors. It was, the panelists were Louise Simonson, who had worked as an editor at Warren and at Marvel, Paul Levitz, who had worked, of course, at DC Comics, Dafna Pleban, who had worked at IDW Boom, John Workman, who worked as an editor at Heavy Metal. He'd worked in other capacities at a number of other publishers, and Mike Pellerito, who works at Archie. They spent a lot of time talking about editing. They didn't quite spend as much time about talking about how editing has changed over time. The first question, what Paul Levitz kind of ran the panel, as well as being one of the panelists, and the first question he asked was, what kind of editor are you, and what are your tricks? What is it that you do to motivate the creators, whether it's the writer or the artists, to do the work? What are your tricks? And you got some interesting stories from them about, from Louise Simonson about working with Chris Claremont, and how he would always, if you told him something, if you gave him bad news on an empty stomach, he would react very badly. But if you took him out to lunch, and after lunch you told him, there's this one thing in that story, if you could change it, he would be completely different. The other editors had some other interesting stories about the challenges of working with writers, and working with different kinds of personalities, and the tricks, other tricks that they used. And I'm going to leave that for the recording. Another thing that Paul Levitz asked is about, one of the things he said, the statements he made, is that part of the job of editors is to discover talent. And so he asked, who were some of the people that you discovered, and who were some of the people that you passed on later people you passed on and were kind of misses because they later went on to do quite good work. They didn't all have answers. Louise Simonson had a few answers. Not all of the people they named I was familiar with. So I didn't write down all the names, but you can certainly hear them on the recording, and possibly some of the names will be names that you're familiar with that I'm not familiar with. Paul Levitz talked about, one of the finds that he made was J.M. DeMatteis. Although he had written him a rejection letter, he said, and that was prior to accepting his work. One of his earlier submissions he had rejected, and DeMatteis has actually held on to that letter and still uses it in classes that he teaches. There was definitely the potential for some crossover between this panel and the writing panel. I'm not sure how many people went to both panels. It was a completely different group of panelists. There was no crossover there. But one of the questions that Paul Levitz posed to the group was, what should an editor know or have in their background to edit comic books? And this was something that had come up a little bit in the writers panel, which is that they're really, and was definitely discussed in this panel, which is, how do editors learn? Because there really aren't, even in places where people are taught how to put together comics, there are no courses on how to edit. And basically, it's apprenticeship. You learn by watching other people and being taught by being, given pointers from other editors, from more senior, more experienced editors, how to edit, and possibly from writers and artists as well. And so they talked a little bit about that, and about the importance of planning and managing a schedule, and balancing the needs of your creators and the needs of the book. You've got to get the book out on a certain schedule, and at the same time, you can't, you can't just be mean to the creators. You have to respect them as people and as artists and as professionals, and that's part of it. And then you have to be picky to a degree. And then they took some questions from the audience. They spoke for probably 45 minutes before they took questions from the audience. One of the most interesting comments that came out of the section where they were answering questions from the audience was something that Mike Pellerito said, which was that as an editor, if you're helping a lot, then you've hired the wrong people. And I think what he was getting at there was, you should be able to, if you hire the right people, they should be able to do the work on their own. Not that you don't need to give them pointers, and not as an editor that you don't need to to offer guidance, but you shouldn't be doing the work for them. You shouldn't be rewriting the stories for them. You shouldn't be redrawing the stories for them, and so on and so forth. And they threw out a few names of people who they had learned from, and Paul Levitz threw out a list that was several names long. I think there was more there. I mean, I really didn't recognize any of the names that the two younger editors, Dafna and Mike, any of the names that they threw out. But that's probably because I'm not as familiar with Archie Comics or IDW Boom. So it was an interesting panel. It wasn't exactly what I thought it would be. They really didn't talk as much. I mean, I think you really would have had to have people who had been in the... I think the entire panel would have been of people who had been in the business a long time. The two junior members of the panel had been in the business each for maybe 10 years tops, or at around 10 years at the most. So, they don't have quite the same kind of tenure. They haven't seen things change or evolve as much. But you really didn't, unfortunately, you didn't get to see how editing has evolved over time, which is kind of what the title of the panel was. The final panel, and really the final thing I did for the day, was I went to the Darwyn Cooke panel. This wasn't exactly what I'd hoped it would be. It wasn't so much a retrospective on Darwyn Cooke. There was four guys on the panel. It was, let me see, it was turning. It was Frank Tieri, Billy Tucci, Dirk Wood, and J.G. Jones who were on the panel. There was really no moderator. Billy Tucci kind of took the helm and kind of moderated it a bit, although I think kind of Dirk Wood also did a bit. And they talked, I mean, they really didn't talk about, they talked about a number of things about Darwyn Cooke. It was supposed to be a tribute panel to Darwyn Cooke. They started off by talking about, what had happened to him, his cancer, and that kind of stuff. And I did tape all of this. They talked a little bit about his work. They talked about his impact on the industry, his impact on other artists. They talked about this stuff a little bit. All these guys, it's a very red meat group of guys, the very alpha group of guys. And the way they talked about Darwyn Cooke is that he definitely fell into that category as well. Heavy drinkers, some of them heavy smokers. Definitely Darwyn Cooke was a heavy smoker, according to them, which is really what, from what I understand, led to his cancer. They took a number of questions from the audience about various subjects. I did not take any notes during this panel. I don't know. For some reason, it felt disrespectful to do so. I think this is the first time I've seen any of these guys on a panel. So it was an interesting experience. They talked a little bit about The New Frontier, which was by far my favorite work that Darwyn Cooke has done. I have not read everything that Darwyn Cooke has done. I've read his run on The Spirit. I've read New Frontier. I've read Batman Ego. I have his issue of Solo. And there's probably one or two other things that I'm forgetting that he did, that I have read. But The New Frontier is beautiful. It is gorgeous. I remember when it was first announced, I remember there's an article out there. You can still find it because I looked it up recently. There's an article out there, or actually I think it's a few articles on Comic Book Resources which had concept art in them. I remember seeing that article. This is before The New Frontier came out, reading it and seeing that art and thinking, I've got to have this. And then reading it and being completely satisfied with what I read. And then when the trades came out, I didn't buy them because I wanted it in one big collection. And so I bought it when the Absolute first came out. I bought it, and I read it again soon thereafter because I bought it in issues when it came out. And it is just gorgeous. It is just such a beautiful story. There are so many moments in that. So many moments that moved me to tears or really moved my heart. There's so many good moments in that. And it is such a good story. And one of the things they mentioned, and I have not gone back to look at this, but is that if you look through there is no page, apparently, that has more than 3 panels in it. And that just stunned me. And actually, now that I think about that, I'm not sure if that came up in this panel or it came up in one of the other 2 panels. You know what? I'm not sure. That may have even come up in the writing panel. I'm not sure. But I recorded all 3 of these panels. Now, this panel ended early. It was supposed to go for an hour from 5:15 to 6:15. But the fire alarm went off at about 5:55. And at first, some of the guys on the panel were joking about it. This is Darwyn's way of, giving us a hard time or something like that. But then we had to leave, and it was 6 o'clock. The show was closing at 7. I stuck around for maybe 10, 15 minutes. It didn't look like anything was happening. Fire truck went by. Who knows how long it took to get all that resolved. My guess is that the show did not reopen tonight. I have no idea what the story is. So it was kind of a whimper of an ending to the show. Never mind the fact it was a fire alarm. But it was kind of a whimper of an ending to the show instead of, I don't know. I'm not sure if the show would really end with a bang, but I was hoping to go back down to the show floor and look around some more, but unfortunately I didn't get the chance to do that. So I went back to my car. I drove home. It took me considerably less time to get home than it did to get up. It took me almost 2 hours to get from my place to get my car parked this morning. Probably an hour and 45, hour and 50 minutes. Tonight, it took me about an hour to get home. And I spent about 25 minutes, I think, getting onto the highway. Because traffic in downtown Baltimore was really bad. Which makes me think about next year parking somewhere else and taking the light rail in, which I have done before, but maybe finding somewhere a little closer, because when I did that before, I parked at BWI. So maybe parking somewhere a little closer and taking the light rail in. I'm not sure. I'll have to see what I can find next year. But for now, I'm locked into this. So that's it for it's day 2 of the convention. It was my first day at the convention. It was a pretty good day on the whole. It wasn't a great day. It was not as good as some prior years. The whole traffic mess situation to begin the day really did not help at all. I got some great comic books, and I'm very happy for that. And the panels were all interesting. None of them was a dud. Let me put it that way. They weren't all exactly what I thought they would be. The first one was definitely my favorite, but it was not. If this was going to be my only day at the convention, I'd say, it was okay. It was okay. It was not a bad day. So hopefully tomorrow will be a much better day at the convention. I'm going in early. I'm going to the farmer's market for breakfast like I usually do on Sundays. And then I'm going to spend the rest of the day at the convention. There are 2 panels there's more than 2 I want to go to, but I think the 2 that I'm going to go to are the Spotlight on Howard Chaykin and the Spotlight on Steve Englehart, which are back-to-back, I think starting around noon or 1 or something like that. And I don't know if I'm going to buy any more comics. We'll have to see on that. Maybe some art, maybe a print or 2. I doubt I'll be commissioning anything. I have no idea what else I will buy, but that's it for my first day at Baltimore Comic-Con 2016. A few corrections before I wrap up this episode. First, the comic book collection that Hope Nicholson put together, the Canadian superhero, the one I was thinking of was Nelvana of the Northern Lights, and I got that through the Kickstarter that she ran for that, and I have it on my bookshelf, although I have yet to read it. The Flash story that most of the issues that I picked up at the Baltimore Comic-Con today were from the Dark Flash saga, and I found that title. That's from Comic Book Resources, Comic Book Database. Yes, Comic Book DB. That's where I found that. And then finally, I was wrong. I don't have New Teen Titans number 40. I don't know what I was thinking. I think it must be because I didn't have it on my list of comics to look for, and so for some reason I thought I had it. But when I went to my inventory, it wasn't there, and then I checked the box. I pulled everything out because I've got the comic books all in order, and it wasn't there. This is like those issues 29 and 30, which I could have sworn that I had, or I'm positive that I had these issues at one point. So I don't know where it is. I'm honestly wondering if one of these days I'm going to be going through a box, not a comic book box, but some other kind of box, and I'm going to lift something up, and there's going to be a stack of comics sitting there, or a few comics sitting there, including these 3 issues of New Teen Titans. But at this point, as far as from New Teen Titans 11 through 40, I am missing 11 of those issues to have that complete run. And then I'm missing 3 more issues of Tales of the Teen Titans to have up through issue 50. Oh, wait, you know what? There's also an annual that I'm missing. I'm also missing annual number 2, which is the one that introduced the Vigilante, the Adrian Chase Vigilante. Yes, I don't have that. I've read it, but I don't have it, and I don't think I ever actually owned it myself. That's it for episode 122. My coverage of Baltimore Comic-Con 2016 continues next episode, where I will be talking about my second and final day at the con. Dave Talks Comics can be found at davetalkscomics.com, as well as on iTunes, Stitcher, and a few other locations. If you have comments or questions, I can be reached at davetalkscomics@gmail.com, on Twitter @DaveTalksComics, or leave a comment on my website. I'm Dave. Thank you for listening.